Hellboy, the Crooked Man Review. I can't believe how little I cared about Hellboy in his own movie. Though he may be something of a cult legend, Mike Mignola's Hellboy character has been the focus of more movies than even some of the biggest comic book characters. Beginning with Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman's live-action films, the two animated spin-offs with Perlman as the titular hero's voice, and David Harbour's 2019 reboot took different approaches to the material and were met with different reactions. One thing that could be said for them all was having a generally structured story, which cannot be said about Hellboy, the Crooked Man. Based on Mignola's limited comic book series of the same name, Hellboy, the Crooked Man takes the franchise back to the 50s and partners the titular hero with fresh BPRD agent Bobby Joe Song to bring back a demonically possessed spider to headquarters. When an accident derails their train and leaves them stranded in the Appalachian Mountains, they learn from the locals of a series of sinister events seemingly connected to the legend of the Crooked Man, putting Hellboy and Song on his path, along with Army vet Tom Farrell, whose past experience proves helpful. Hellboy, the Crooked Man lacks any rhythm to its story, with the movie taking a more direct approach to adapting its source material. One would think there'd be a smooth translation from comic to screen, particularly since Mignola is also on board as a co-writer. Unfortunately, his prior comments about leaving the creative nature of the films in other hands, due to not being a filmmaker, feel all too prevalent in Hellboy. The Crooked Man's story, as it feels incredibly disjointed in the first half of the film. The other major sin is that the Crooked Man's story can't decide how much it wants to focus on Hellboy. The decision to move away from the previously explored origin story of the titular character, one they sadly later reverse, is a smart one, as we feel just as disoriented as the characters when we're dropped in just moments before the train derailment. Even the shift to a smaller threat compared to the world-threatening ones seen in every prior movie also makes it feel very different from previous adaptations, opening the door for more character and horror-tinged moments. However, where the door was open for this, it feels like the film instead tried to jump through the window next to it, which leads to the movie being a mess. The rest of the cast of characters largely outshine Hellboy himself, but the biggest sin is that every story moment feels like it only exists to progress the plot rather than organically play events out. I was so often left wondering why we were suddenly jumping to a new scene, or why characters were dropping exposition, when they seemingly should have had none of the expertise required for these plot dumps. The other major sin is that the Crooked Man's story can't decide how much it wants to focus on Hellboy. When he does get scenes, particularly as the movie gradually moves to explore his origin story, I didn't really feel any kind of emotional connection to him. The few big beats are comprised of him attempting to wax poetic about the supernatural dangers of the Appalachians, or cracking jokes about things they see, which doesn't make him nearly as engaging as Perlman or Harbour. The movie's budget is consistently felt. Since the trailer first dropped for the film, there were criticisms that Hellboy, the Crooked Man, just looked cheaper than its predecessors, which was something I was willing to defend from the mindset of it being a more isolated, smaller tale. However, having now seen the film, I agree there are far too many scenes in the movie that prove distracting because of how underwhelming the effects looked. From the film's opening moments, in which we see the demonically possessed spider going on a rampage that leads to the train derailing, it becomes immediately apparent the team was working with a smaller amount of money compared to previous adaptations. Even as the film progresses, and we see everything from visions of a woman on fire to people being attacked by supernatural snakes, the smaller budget is hard to ignore. One of the worst signs of this is none other than the Crooked Man himself, who is, admirably, made up in practical effects. However, even with my appreciation for the focus on practical effects, he isn't nearly as terrifying as he is in the comics, with the rope indentation on his neck looking more fake than grotesque. and his face lacking the inhuman appearance that he has in the source material.